Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We just came off the weekend of the Combine, so tons of Combine takeaways. We're going to do a Good Vibes Monday about some guys that really had a great weekend. And then we'll get into some rule changes possibly coming to the sport in 2024. Some very interesting topics that we talked a little bit about last week, but we'll get into more detail this week. And then we have the ACC and the Big 12 being not too happy with the SEC and the Big 10 over the new proposals for the playoff. Tons of discussion there, so we will get into all of that. But before we get into all of that, let's start with the fact that we get a lot of questions throughout the show and a lot of inquiries to be on the show, and I think the best way for y'all to get through and see your questions on the screen is use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all to see your questions across the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net, so put your questions in there if you want to be seen on the screen. But let's start with the Combine, because that's what everyone was talking about this weekend. That's what a ton of college football fans were watching to see how their favorite players would do this weekend, and some guys really showed out. And I think the place everyone's going to start this morning, and the place that I will start, is Xavier Worthy, breaking the 40-yard dash record, running a 4.21. He was just absolutely flying. And a super awesome moment in that stadium. Not only you could see the look on his face when he realized he had a shot to break it and had tied it at the time. And then the crowd getting into it was just an all-time moment. So a very, very cool moment for him, and very, very cool moment for the fans in attendance to see that in real time. But tons happened yesterday, or tons happened throughout the weekend. And we had a ton of guys burst onto the scene, a ton of guys, not necessarily perform up to what they would like, but I think it all started, and a lot of the talk throughout the weekend was about JJ McCarthy. And I think that was expected going into the weekend with the top three quarterbacks sitting. That quarterback 4 position seems to be his, at least according to most people, he seems to be sitting in that spot. So it wasn't surprising that he was kind of the talk of the town. And although throughout the throwing drills he was a little bit inconsistent at times, missed some out routes that teams would have loved to see him hit, I think he had a really solid day. It wasn't necessarily the perfect thing that he had dreamed up, I'm sure, but as a quarterback, he showed his athletic ability, was 5th overall in the 3-cone drill, which is just insane among the running backs and wide receivers he was going up against. But overall had a really good workout, showed that, he can make the requisite throws that are necessary, so I wouldn't be surprised if there were some teams that were finding their way up the board to get JJ McCarthy. I saw a mock draft by Cam Marino that had Minnesota trading up to the 4 spot to grab him, which with Kirk Cousins, possibly heading out of town, I don't think that's much of a surprise. I think there is, some merit to possibly he'll be there later in the draft, but as we've known, teams don't like to take that risk. So if Minnesota really likes him, I wouldn't be surprised if they traded up to 4 and he ended up being the 4th straight quarterback to come off the board. So we'll see what happens there. But a couple other quarterbacks that had really solid days. Joe Milton had some viral moments for sure with his absolute cannon on the right side of his torso. The dude threw a ball, I think, 73.5 yards, which is 4 yards longer than the longest pass in the NFL last year from Josh Allen, which was 69.3, I believe. So absolutely just a beast of a human. I mean, can sling the ball a million miles. In the Orange Bowl, when he kind of broke onto the scene against Clemson, threw an orange 106 yards, which is always just a fun thing to watch. A guy just absolutely sling something. So Joe Milton's a very fun quarterback. There's no two ways about that. When you watch him throw a deep ball, it is just jaw-dropping, and it dropped a lot of jaws around Indianapolis, I'm sure. So I will say for him, it's a lot about consistency and accuracy, which we'll get into a little bit later. But he did well for himself yesterday, or on Saturday, excuse me. I don't think there's any question about that. Whether or not, it translates into getting drafted, whether or not people kind of overlook some of the tape that's out there and take him, I don't know. But he definitely had a solid day. And then Michael Penix, who is one of the more gifted throwers in the entire draft, had a really good day. Showed off what he's really capable of, showed off the ability for he can just absolutely spin it. The ball moves just faster in that spiral than pretty much any other quarterback that was there. Had the arm strength, did a ton of really good things. So he's another quarterback that a lot was up in the air this week, and he answered a lot of the questions that people had about him. So it'll be interesting to see what that develops into throughout pro days and everything like that. But I think Michael Penix did a really solid job and definitely caught the eyes of some teams this weekend. But one of the major things that stood out to me, and I'm sure to a lot of people that were watching, is this wide receiver class is just remarkable. We knew about the top three guys. We knew Marvin Harrison Jr. is an athletic freak. We knew Rome Odunze is as technical and proficient of a route runner as we've seen in a while. We knew Malik Neighbors was so complete and fast and can make people miss and all of these incredible things with those top three guys. But everyone else showed out. It felt like Brian Thomas and A.D. Mitchell running a 4.34 at their size is just insane. It shouldn't be possible. We talked about Xavier Worthy bursting onto the scene with his 40-yard dash. Ladd McConkey had an incredible day showing off his ability to catch essentially anything around him and, make everything look very, very easy. His gauntlet run was just incredible. And then there's other guys deeper in the class. You got Malachi Corley, Malik Washington, Ricky Pearsall, Keon Coleman, Tez Walker. So tons of guys to pick from in this class. I think there are a ton of teams that might be drafting in the first round and say, we can wait until the second or third and still get a very good wide receiver that can help us right away. So it'll be interesting to see the approach from teams on the wide receiver position just because of how deep that position really is. As for the running back class, it was kind of an up and down day. I think they had some really good moments. Trey Benson had a great 40 time, which a lot of us expected. Jalen Wright showed off incredible athletic ability in the broad jump and the 40. So both those guys had great days with the assumed running back one right now and Jonathan Brooks not participating. They had a really good day to help them out. Possibly there's some teams out there that have them in the top spot for right now, but some lower level guys that had great days were Kamani Vidal out of Troy, and then Isaac Garindo out of Louisville had an incredible day, led the running backs in 40 time. We'll get into both those guys a little bit later. But a really cool moment in this entire combine, one of the cooler moments next to Xavier Worthy's 40 run was Dallin Holker going through the gauntlet, and he, I guess, did not think there was another ball to be thrown, started to turn upfield, looked back, found the ball, and caught it with one hand, so he's running down the field with two balls. So although that is obviously, not the most remarkable thing in the world, or I don't think any team is going to make a decision based off of that by any means, but a very cool moment and showed his athletic ability and his concentration in those moments. So definitely showed something, I'll tell you that. As for the cornerback class, it was kind of an interesting day for a lot of guys. Nate Wiggins weighed in at 173, which is not necessarily the ideal size you wanted him to be at. Above 180 would have been great for him, but at the end of the day, still tons of talent around him. He ran a 4.28 in the 40, so tons of speed, tons of ability, but as we saw last year, Emmanuel Forbes weighed in at 166 and then got drafted in the first round and just had a really tough year, especially in the run game. So it could be that teams are a little bit more wary of taking someone like Nate Wiggins because of what happened with Emmanuel Forbes a year ago. But also, Emmanuel Forbes, another guy that is plenty talented, the ability is still there. So I wouldn't be surprised if Nate Wiggins still found himself in the first round, late second round, because the ability's there, but the size is less than desirable, I would say. But for the rest of the cornerback class, I think it's really hard to put a pin on the ordering of all of this. I think one guy that really, in my eyes, kind of locked up his case for cornerback one is Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. Everything was good. There was not a part of that session where he looked choppy, where he looked out of sync. He just looked very under control the entire time, was around the top in pretty much every measurement, so did a ton of things really well. And then a guy kind of off the radar a little bit, Kamari Lassiter from UGA, had a really good day. Showed his ability to track balls, which is absolutely remarkable from the cornerback position. Some of the plays he made last year are just jaw-dropping. So he's someone that I think caught a lot of teams' eyes and possibly played himself into the second day. But it'll be interesting to see how he kind of can build off this when it comes to top 30 visits and pro day and all of the things that stand between now and draft day. But Kamari Lassiter made a great first impression, that's for sure. Someone in the back end that did not necessarily have the best day is Cam Kitchens. I talked about him last week as a guy that had a chance to make some real noise this week with the void that is left in the safety class at safety number 1. And Cam Kitchens did not do a great job of kind of taking advantage of all that. He really struggled in a lot of the workouts, and he has plenty of good game tape out there, but this weekend did not help. I can't imagine that there weren't a lot of people coming into this week thinking safety is entirely up for grabs for who we think is the best guy, and I can't imagine Cam Kitchens impressed a ton of people, but still a ton of good game tape out there. We'll see what happens with him, but obviously not the combine that he wanted. A guy that absolutely lit the world on fire yesterday was Joe Alt. He did everything incredibly well. Measured in at almost 6'9", which is just insane. I think he's offensive tackle number 1. Olu Fashanu probably following right after him, but so many good guys in this class. You have Amarius Mims right after them, Troy Fatanu right after them, so tons of depth in this class. Roger Rosengarter, another guy out of Washington, so tons of really, really talented guys that you can get in the second or third round instead of, the top 2 guys in Joe Alt and Olu Fashanu, which will probably be top 10 picks. But it'll be interesting to see how all of this comes to fruition. I think Joe Alt is set in offensive tackle 1 spot, but we'll see what happens there. And then just kind of a final takeaway for this combine, from my point of view, is there should never be another combine without fans. Was the best atmosphere, was super fun, brought the best out in the players, which is obviously the most important thing in this, right? You want to give the players the best ability to show what they're really about and not be in their own head with the pin drop silence that used to be in Lucas Oil during this workout. But you could tell the fans were really into it. You could feel the energy in that room when, Worthy broke the 40 or Joe Milton threw the incredible pass. So there were a lot of moments throughout the combine that I think a lot of people really enjoyed because the fans were there. So they should have fans every single year. It shouldn't be a question from now on, and add more fans. Make it, a real spectacle, because it's really fun to see these guys show off their athletic ability, because a lot of these guys are absolute freaks. So very excited to see that continue in the future, I hope. And then it'll be interesting to see just how all of this takes shape. Tons of guys did really good work, but at the end of the day, like we talked about last week, the combine means varying things to different teams. So we'll see how each team takes this into account, and we'll see who comes out on top for a lot of these guys that are very highly coveted after this week. But that'll do it for the combine talk for now. When we come back, we're going to get into the new rule changes coming across college football. Tons of very interesting stuff to get to. So when we get back, we will talk about that, but stick around.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some lucid shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the combine takeaways, some guys that really showed out, some guys that had some tough days. But now, let's get into some rule changes, why don't we? There are so many things happening around college football, but one of the more interesting things that have happened over the past couple of days is helmet communication. We talked about it a little bit last week and some possible effects of this, but it looks like they're fast-tracking this, and it doesn't necessarily look like it will take effect until April 18th when the Rules Committee for the NCAA actually meets for the next time. But at the end of the day, it looks like all of this stuff is going to get fast-tracked into the 2024 season, so it'll be interesting to see the effects. But all the changes. First, helmet communication. We talked about that. Some new details came out about that. And then tablets on the sideline. Another thing we touched on a little bit. Two NFL staples that have found their way down to college football. And then the 2-minute warning. Another one that is a little bit more contentious, I think, around the college football community than the others. But still, three very interesting rule changes that will change the whole dynamic of different games. So let's jump right in. First, some new information about the helmet comms is they will cut off with 15 seconds to go on the play clock, which is very interesting for so many reasons. I think it will increase teams running hurry-up, no-huddle type offenses because, first of all, when you can talk straight to your quarterback and the quarterback can relay that to everyone else, it makes things a lot faster. But also, you want to be able to communicate for as long up until the snap of the football as possible. So I think we will see a good amount more teams, at least the ones that are comfortable doing it, run a little bit faster of a pace because of this. And then one player on each team will be able to wear it at any given time, so one player on each side of the ball. And I think, obviously, it's going to be quarterback for every offense, but the interesting part is defense, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I think this is one of the more interesting changes to college football in a while because a lot of the other changes have had very little to do with football, at least the actual game-to-game football. There has been a lot of changes that have involved conference realignment, so playing totally different teams. Doesn't have anything to do with the actual football game. Playoff reconstruction obviously has something to do with the structure of the season, but doesn't change the game. So very, very interesting that this is the first in these recent changes that has a direct impact on the day-to-day, or the game-to-game, play-to-play impact of the game. So there's so many different things to think about here, especially with, Michigan kind of pushing this along with some of their sign stealing. That obviously is something that we have found out is not exclusive to Michigan, but they were the ones that kind of started this whole thing and pushed this forward, which kind of a bittersweet thing. Obviously, this is the change that I really like and I think is going to be good for the sport, but it came at the expense of a lot of other things. So not necessarily the way you wanted to get here, but we're here now, and it's a very interesting addition because a lot of offensive play callers have loved this idea for a very, very long time. But it does give some interesting decision making to come down because there are some QB battles, mainly Oregon. I'm not sure how much of a battle it actually is. I think Dylan Gabriel will end up winning out. But at the end of the day, with this new introduction, someone like Dante Moore, who we know is physically talented, we know has incredible arm talent and can do a ton of really, really good things on the football field, but at the end of the day was not the most consistent with picking up coverages, with you know, communicating all the time, doing all the things that are very important for young quarterbacks and very important for quarterbacks in general. And I think this takes the pressure off him a little bit to identify all of the coverages that he's going up against and find a way to communicate with everyone in real time. So having, whether it's, you know, Will Stein, I assume, will be the guy with the other end of this walkie-talkie situation they got going. But I think there's going to be some form of a push for younger quarterbacks to be able to get on the field faster. We talked about this a little bit last week, but there is that intense push at all times for, you know, the most talented guys to get on the field at all times. So especially in this quarterback battle where you might have a younger guy that's probably physically more talented but just doesn't fully understand the game or the playbook quite as well as an older guy, and you have the ability now to go with the younger guy and be in his ear and help him out through all these different things. So there's a lot that will come into play here. I think one of the big things that this will put more earnest on the quarterback for is communication, right? In past, when you look over to the sideline, it's everyone looking over and getting different signs and stuff of that nature. But at the end of the day, if, let's say, signs are no longer a part of the sideline, which I think it's very possible that they will be. I think there will be signs for wide receivers or running backs or tight ends or whatever, what have you. But I do think this increases the earnest on the quarterback to be a really good communicator, to, you know, have his guys fully prepared for each play, and a lot of that is going to fall on him because it's going to go into his ear and then straight out to the team. So the communication for these quarterbacks just became a little bit more important, that's for sure. But let's get into the defensive side of the ball for this, because a lot of very interesting implications here. Obviously, you have one guy on the defensive side of the ball that will be able to wear it at any given time, and the vast majority of these will be veteran linebackers, the, you know, Jahad Campbells of the world, Smile Munden, guys that fully understand the playbook, fully understand how to communicate with their teams, and also command respect on the field, which is a super important thing. But there are some teams out there that will probably be relying on some younger kids to do it. Anthony Hill is the first to come to mind, a sophomore linebacker at Texas, that I tend to believe will be the guy that will have the mic in his ear and will be the communicator on defense. And while he is a plenty talented guy, he is going into his second year in college. So there is that worry that maybe he's not all the way there in terms of communication. So the defensive side of the ball is very interesting because there's so many guys that can do the job, but at the end of the day, you want your linebacker probably being the guy just because that's the center of the defense, can communicate with everyone very efficiently. But there are tons of really experienced guys, so it'll be interesting to see how they kind of allocate those, and does a, you know, nickelback like a Malachi Moore maybe get the duties instead of a Jahad Campbell, or there's tons of guys. Malachi Starks is another guy on Georgia that could get it instead of Smile Munden. So tons of really interesting decisions to be made in terms of who gets the headset, and does the headset bounce around on the defensive side of the ball a little bit. So tons of unknowns in this situation, tons of things that will remain to be seen. And I think one of the really interesting parts of all of this is, with the Rules Committee not meeting until April 18th, there's not really a chance to implement most of these changes until after spring ball, which is something that I'm sure teams are not too happy about if they are going to end up showing up in the 2024 season. you want to be able to go through your spring game, go through all of the spring practices and scrimmages and all of things of that nature with those headsets, because it makes everyone more comfortable. It makes everyone understand the flow of every play call and everything like that. So it's a very interesting thing that I think maybe not a lot of people are necessarily thinking about, but I think there's going to be some people that are playing a little bit of catch up in the summer and trying to figure out what this situation is and how to handle it all, because it is going to be a new thing. You know, having a guy in your ear among all the other sounds around you and the crowd and everything, it's going to be a thing that quarterbacks especially, are going to have to handle with grace, and it'll be interesting to see if they're able to do that and which quarterbacks are able to do that, because I tend to think some more veteran guys would be more equipped to handle that, but who knows? Maybe I'm totally wrong on that. I think a lot of people that I, massively respect in this industry have said, I think it totally leans in the younger quarterback's direction, which makes sense to me. But I do think there is the layer of, this is a new change. This is something that quarterbacks are going to have to wrap their head around. And when you're trying to do that along with learning the playbook, it can be a little bit tougher. So I think some older quarterbacks might handle this a little bit better in the short term, but in the long term, it does lend itself to younger players being able to play faster and then also, be ready faster in games. So I think there's a lot of different theories about how all this is going to come about, how all this is going to work out, but I think for the most part, it's a great change. I think the tablets on the sideline is another no-brainer. It makes total sense, and it'll increase the level of football, which is the most important thing. It's huge assist to younger guys as well, because being able to go on the sideline and see exactly what you did wrong in real time only helps their learning process and only increases their learning process. So very interested to see how that has an effect. And we'll also see some guys on the coaching staff that might be a little bit of unsung heroes, using the tablet to help out their guys. I know for a long time there was Buster Faulkner down at Georgia was a huge help to Stetson Bennett, but a lot of people didn't really know his name until he got the job at Georgia Tech as the OC, and now he has burst onto the scene. So tons of guys that we will be able to see that we might not have been able to see prior because of all these new changes, which I'm super excited about. Always love to see some new faces in the coaching world. So I think it's going to be great. I think all these changes are good. I think the one that people are a little contentious about is the 2-minute warning. I don't necessarily love it myself, I'll be honest, but at the end of the day, commercial breaks are a big part of this game, at least for the people that end up making the decisions. So I think this was always going to happen. It was kind of an inevitability, but not the biggest fan, but I can live with it. It's not the biggest deal either. So a lot of really interesting changes. I'm sure there are some unintended consequences that will be coming with these, but at the end of the day, I'm very interested to see what all of this leads to, how people utilize the in-helmet communications and which teams benefit the most, because at the end of the day, the teams that can utilize this the best might be the team that ends up lifting the trophy at the end of the year. So a lot of very interesting things to keep track of here, but new rule changes look like they're coming to college football, and they are not alone in the changes that are coming to college football. So I will keep you up to date with all of the happenings there. But we're going to take another break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk playoff discussions, getting a little contentious between the ACC and Big 12 and the SEC and Big 10, some fighting for power, but we'll see where all of that leads. But stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back. We just talked about some of the rule changes coming to college football next year, possibly the helmet communications, the tablets on the sideline, and the 2-minute warning. Two of those I'm very excited about, one not so excited about, but I will live with. And then it's time for playoff discussions. It has been the hot topic for what feels like forever at this point, but it just got a little bit more interesting. It just got a little bit more of a hot topic in the recent weeks and in the recent days. As we know, we talked about last week the 14-team playoff that would take a very interesting structure. 3 auto bids to the SEC in the Big Ten, 2 to the ACC in the Big 12, and then 1 to the Group of 5. And the wrinkle in all of that is the SEC and the Big Ten, whoever wins their conference championship will likely be the team that gets the buys, or will be the team that gets the buys in the current formatting. So, as you can imagine, the ACC and the Big 12 are not super happy with that. They don't think that's a remotely fair way to go about things. Obviously, the best 2 teams should get the buys no matter what, but it looks like that was the way that the SEC and the Big Ten were willing to compromise from 4 back down to 3. And I think this is kind of just the next step on what has been happening in the sport for a very long time, but especially over the last couple of years, the SEC and the Big Ten have kind of just been stacking power and teams and everything that you could imagine to make them the biggest power brokers in college football. So that's what this has all been leading to. That's what all of this has been kind of coming to a head to, but it's here. I'll be honest. The SEC and the Big Ten are fully aware that they are the power brokers in in college football right now. They are fully aware that where they go, college football goes, and they're fully aware that they play on a different level than a lot of these other conferences. And whether or not the gap is as big as they think it is, I tend to think they think it's a lot bigger than it is. But at the end of the day, they do have a lot of power. They do have a lot of big names. They have a ton of big teams. And they're wielding it. They're doing everything in their power to wield it. So I talked about last week, I didn't think the 14-team playoff will be the last iteration of the playoff we see. I feel even more confident about that today than I did a week ago. I think the SEC and the Big Ten have every idea of what they're doing. There is no confusion on their end. There is no hesitation on their end in a lot of ways. They have everything that they're doing is very calculated in my mind. Josh Pate talked about this on his show, where the SEC and the Big Ten have been building up so much power for so long that people have kept telling them that they are so above the sport, so much far above Big 12 and the ACC, and in a lot of cases they are. I'm not necessarily trying to disprove the idea that the SEC and the Big Ten play a higher level of football than others, but the more and more you tell those conferences that they are above everyone else and they're above the sport and they, run the sport in a lot of ways, the more they think, well, why do we run the sport through the NCAA then? Why do we use, the powers that be right now to run us if we are so far and above everyone else? Shouldn't we be governed a different way? And that's what they want to do. The SEC and the Big Ten have made really every indication that they have no intention of sticking around in the NCAA very longer. And I don't know how quickly this will happen. I don't know what's really, being said in all of these conversations. But I do know that the SEC came to the table, the SEC and the Big Ten, I should say, came to the table the first time with they wanted 4 auto bids each in a 12-team playoff. So they wanted 2/3 of the playoff. Then they decided they were going to come back and say, okay, we'll go down to 3, but we get the automatic buys in the 14-team. So in my eyes, the SEC has been approaching this and the Big Ten the same in a sense where we're just going to throw out all of the ideas that we have, all of the ideas that keep us up top, that keep us as the power brokers of the sport. And yeah, we'll throw a couple auto bids everyone else's direction. We'll throw them a bone every now and then. But at the end of the day, we want to be the teams that define the postseason in college football. And I think a lot of those proposals, a lot of the things that they've thrown out there, they knew weren't going to get approved. They knew they were going to make the ACC and the Big 12 mad. They knew they were going to create a lot of problems at that table when they brought forth both those ideas. But I don't think they really cared all that much, I'll be honest. I think the SEC and the Big 10 approached those conversations with the idea that they wanted to be their own thing. The idea that they didn't want to be under the umbrella of the NCAA anymore. They wanted to break off and be their own entity, which is, there's been some reports and rumors that has been bouncing around that room recently. And using that as a jumping off point, that the SEC and the Big 10 don't really want to be in the NCAA anymore. They don't really want to be affiliated with the rest of the sport in a lot of ways anymore. You look back at the offers that they brought to the table and you think, okay, so they had no intention of getting these passed, really. And that's I'm not to say, the SEC and the Big 10 were going totally grandiose over the top to make sure all of this happened, but they knew that when they came to the table with a 4-bid each 12-team playoff, teams weren't going to be happy. They knew when they came to the table with a auto bid into the bye week with their conference championships, they weren't going to be happy. So the SEC and the Big 10 were in full control of this situation, and they had very little care for what the rest of the conferences wanted. And I think it's something that Josh Pate talked about on his show, and something that I wish wasn't the case, but it seems that more and more it is the case. The SEC and the Big 10 just wanted to show up. They wanted to get in front of all these people, put out, 2 or 3 or 4 proposals, all of which, were massively slanted their direction, and they knew ACC and the Big 12 weren't going to agree to. They could get the Pac-12 to agree to essentially anything as long as they're involved, but those two in particular were never going to be happy about this, especially with the ACC kind of fighting for their lives right now. They were never going to be okay with this. They were never going to, be all hunky-dory and everyone was going to walk out holding hands and all of that. They knew that these proposals were a little ridiculous. They knew that these proposals were going to make some people mad. But they didn't necessarily care. Because the whole goal for the SEC and the Big 10 is to be the sport. I think we've seen that. There has been a onslaught after Texas and OU jumped to the SEC, and obviously this started well before that with the SEC taking A&M and Missouri, and the Big 10 taking Nebraska and all of that stuff. But once Texas and OU jumped to the SEC, the Big 10 felt the pressure to keep up, right? And they got 4 great teams from the Pac-12 in Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. And then everyone else was kind of left to pick up the scraps at the end of the day. And as the SEC and Big 10, continued their monopolizing of college football in a lot of ways, they started to see the writing on the wall that everyone was backing them. Everyone knew that they were the most powerful. And at the end of the day, if you are ESPN or if you're Fox or whatever, if you're one of those programs, you have no reason to really stop them necessarily. As much as, some people in that room that love college football for what it used to be and what it can be in the future if we don't go totally off the rails here, there's no real incentive for them to stop the SEC and the Big 10, because at the end of the day, the SEC and the Big 10 are what make college football money in a lot of ways. They bring in the most money, they bring in the most viewership, so you'd be hard-pressed to find someone in an ESPN or a Fox position that has any desire to call out the SEC and the Big Ten on what they're doing and the effects it might have on the sport. But at the end of the day, it is having a negative effect on the sport. It's keeping what made the sport fun, which is everyone wakes up, that first day of spring practice or the first game day or whatever, knowing that they have at least somewhat of a shot. But the SEC and the Big Ten have no desire to give them that shot. So I think it leaves a lot of questions, obviously. I think the SEC and the Big Ten will be an NFC, AFC type model, and then the lower tier, quote-unquote, lower tier teams will have to kind of figure out what their future looks like, because the SEC and the Big Ten are not going to worry about it. They do not much care what your future looks like. They care what theirs looks like. So very, very interesting situation. A lot of moving parts, a lot of infighting, I'm sure a lot of contentious conversations going on. But tons of questions that come out of all of this, mainly for the people left out, for the Big 12 and ACC teams that don't find their way to the SEC. How much TV money is left for those guys? How much are those companies willing to put on the table for two conferences that have either been possibly gutted by that time, because there's no indication necessarily that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to stop taking teams. So many teams want in, so you might as well take more power with the Florida States and the Clemsons and the North Carolinas of the world, which very interesting development in the North Carolina State, Duke, all that situation, which we will get into probably on tomorrow's show. But there's so many question marks for the quote-unquote lower tier teams. How much, talent is left after the schools that go to the SEC and Big Ten? How much do people actually want to play in the Big 12 or the ACC? How much do people not want to play in the big, NFL type setup that the SEC and the Big Ten are heading towards? And if all of that comes to play, if TV deals dry out, and if the talent runs low, and if a lot of teams are taken from your conference, and all of these things, what happens to these sports? There's not unlimited money in all of these athletic departments. We showed last week it's only about 30 of these that turn a profit. So if you cut even the media deal by 40%, a lot of these programs are going to be in trouble, because whether it's keeping up with recruiting or just staying on the field, being able to field a team, a lot of these things are going to happen. There's going to be teams that fold. There's going to be teams that don't think it's viable to have a football program. There's going to be teams that, just play every other sport. It's going to lead to a lot of very drastic changes. And all of this stuff is going to come at the expense of a really special part of the sport, which is the fact that anyone from Ohio to Ohio State, from South Alabama to Alabama, all of those people show up with, at least an idea that they are a part of a huge, important sport to a lot of people. And if the SEC and Big Ten break off, there is going to be less of that for the Sun Belt and the ACC. They won't necessarily be a part of the important part of the sport, which is insane for so many reasons. And I really hope it doesn't come to that, but we're kind of staring down the barrel of it. I'd be surprised if the Big Ten and the SEC didn't find a way to break off and find their own place. And I wish it wasn't the case, but it's going to be the case, I think. So it'll be a weird world we live in. The sport itself, I talked about it last week. The in-stadium atmospheres will still be there. The fandom will still be there. The hatred between teams will still be present. It's just, it won't be the sport that we all grew up and have been watching the last couple of years. So very weird. Tons of changes are going to come to this sport very quickly, and I guess we'll look back in 2026 and see where we are, because right now it feels like we could be in a entirely different place with an entirely different structure, with multiple different leagues and just tons of things happening around the sport that aren't the sport in a lot of ways. But I'm going to be here to cover it all, because college football is one of those things that I'm going to love for the rest of my life. I can't quit it. There's no way. So no matter what happens with this sport, I still think we have a great product. I still think we have a great sport for so many reasons. It's just, you wish that the people up top making the decisions that will affect all of the fans and affect everything thought about the fans before they made decisions. But it's the world we live in. So we'll try to save as much as we can, but college football is going to be different here pretty soon. But let's get out of negativity world. We're going to be back here in a second with a Good Vibes Monday. We're going to talk about some guys that made some money this week. Always a good thing for some college guys coming out of the draft process to show out on Combine Day and possibly bank a little bit more in their bank account than they initially had thought. So let's talk about those right after this break. So stick with us and we will be right back. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the college football playoff discussions and how they are becoming a little bit contentious and how it could lead to a very different college football world than we have gotten used to. But we're going to change up the vibes a little bit. It is Good Vibes Monday. Got to start everyone off on a good note, and I think the best way to do that is to break down some guys that made some money for themselves this weekend throughout the Combine. There are a ton of guys that had remarkable performances and really solidified themselves, whether it's in the first round or the second round or the second day. Tons of guys made huge leaps up the board that might surprise you. So let's jump right in. Let's start with Joe Milton. We talked about him a little bit earlier. Dude has a cannon attached to the right side of his torso. I don't know how it is possible someone can sling a ball quite as far as he can, but threw a ball 4 yards further than the longest air yards last year with 73.5 yards in the air, which is mind-boggling stuff. He would, on the go routes, everyone was looking forward to seeing him go, and he literally got to the top of his drop, waited another second and a half, and then unleashed a ball. So the guys were already 40 yards downfield, 50 yards downfield before he even released. And it was just an incredible thing to watch. A great video by Lance Zierlein showing him backing off a absolute dime of a deep pass and doing a little salute to it as it went through the air. But he's someone that, if you watch the game tape, I'll be honest, you're not going to be blown away. There is tons of physical ability, especially the arm talent, obviously, but the accuracy is a huge concern. He missed a good amount of guys in the workout, and if it wasn't for those go balls that he threw, I think it would have been a very different conversation around him. But at the end of the day, the way college football coaches work, the way NFL coaches work, the way a lot of sports coaches work is they see a guy with all the talent in the world, but lacking accuracy or lacking ability to break down defenses as quickly as possible. And someone in that room will mutter to themselves, I can fix him. Someone will make themselves feel like they are the people to bring out the best in Joe Milton and make him a quarterback that college football fans haven't really seen, at least in his 1 year of starting at Tennessee. It was not necessarily the year that he had hoped, but at the end of the day, it's hard to overlook the physical talent. So I think he definitely is someone that teams will take a flyer on late in the draft, and we'll see where the chips fall because the talent is there, but man, the accuracy, it leaves a lot to be desired. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with him. Another guy that absolutely lit the board on fire was Adonai Mitchell from Texas and Georgia earlier on in his career. Everything about this workout was elite. There was very few things that he left on the table. Obviously, 4.34 at that size, we talked about it, just insane that him and Brian Thomas were able to pull that off. Basically, he locked himself into the first round. I don't think there's much question about that. I think he sits somewhere probably wide receiver 5 right after Brian Thomas and the 3 guys up top. But at the end of the day, if he's at 32, I have a hard time believing that the Chiefs are not going to grab him up and put him along Travis Kelce because they need a wide receiver. And a guy like A.D. Mitchell is hard to leave on the board at 32 if you're the Chiefs. So I would be surprised if he made it out of the first round. He's a guy that makes every big play, does a ton of things really, really well. So teams are going to want him. There's no two ways about that. It's just, does he make it to 32 or does he get picked earlier in my mind? So, but another wide receiver that had a really, really good workout was Ladd McConkey. And we talked about his gauntlet drill. It was absolutely perfect. They will show it in future combines to show guys how to go through this drill because it was picture perfect in every way. And he is a super complete receiver. There are a lot of people that want to put him in the slot receiver role, and while he can play there, he is plenty talented on the outside as well. His stop and go is better than every wide receiver in this draft, I would say, or at least right up there. So his ability to get open is incredible. I would be surprised if he made it past pick 45-ish. So early second round is what I see for him, most likely. And a lot of that just has to do with how good the wide receiver class is, because he's probably sitting somewhere around wide receiver 6 or 7 with Xavier Worthy kind of in that group. But Ladd McConkey is so complete, does a ton of things really well, and I think wherever he goes will be an immediate impact guy for a team because of the different ways that you can use him. But let's get to running backs. We talked about these guys a little bit earlier in the show, but Isaac Guerendo had an incredible day. Best 40 time for running backs coming out of Louisville, just had an incredible year last year, had the 5th highest raw athletic score among running backs of all time. Shout out to Kent Lee Platt for that. He's a incredible guy that, keeps me up to date with a ton of combine stuff that is a little bit hard to contextualize, but he makes it very easy to contextualize. So definitely give him a follow. This was a huge workout for him. We talked about this running back class. It's kind of wide open. Jonathan Brooks is sitting at the RB1 for most guys, but at the end of the day, he didn't work out, and we don't know how quickly he's going to find his way back from that injury. So there's an open door for a lot of different guys, and I'm sure Isaac Guerendo jumped up a ton of boards this weekend because his performance was really incredible. He did a ton of things really well, and I'm sure his interviews were great because he comes off as a guy that just absolutely loves football in every sense of the word. So very excited to see what he can do. I think he probably played himself into the second day of the draft, but time will tell for that. Another running back that had a great day is Kamani Vidal. Fantastic workout for him. Just did everything really well. Was in, I think, the top 10 for pretty much everything for running backs. And is a super, super smart guy. Has played a ton of football. Runs really, really tough. So if you wanted to use him as a short yardage guy until he gets a little bit more comfortable at the next level, I think that makes total sense. A little bit smaller in terms of height, so a little bit more of a bowling ball figure. So that short yardage stuff would definitely really help him, going along with, some of the milia of incredible dynamic backs. I think having him as a change of pace guy could be super helpful, and a short yardage guy. So I think he's someone to watch. Probably won't go until the third day, but who knows? This running back class, the boards, I'm sure, are all over the place, all over the league. So we'll see where he ends up. I think he's going to be a huge help to whatever team he pops up in, whether that's special teams or short yardage or being the back. I don't think it much matters for him. He's ready to play football. So very excited to see what he can do. Some tight ends that absolutely blew up on the board are Theo Johnson and Dalen Holker. We talked about Dalen Holker's incredible play and the gauntlet that turned a lot of eyes, but he's someone that really showed out in both the pass catching and the blocking drills. Very complete tight end. And he kind of reminds me of those Sam Laporta, George Kittle, like the hard-nosed guys that can still go out and make some plays. I think his blocking is going to be a large reason that he gets drafted super high, but I do think his pass catching ability is something that might catch some teams off guard throughout the season. So I'm very excited to see what he can do, because we've seen young tight ends in recent years, blow up immediately. So very excited to see what he can do. And then Theo Johnson, another raw athletic score just off the charts, was insane in pretty much everything. His raw athletic score, and this is out of 10, it was a 9.99. So just about as close as you can get to being the most athletic tight end since 1987, according to Kent Lee Platt's algorithm there. So Theo Johnson had an incredible workout. Dude is 6'8", 258, so not lacking for size by any means. Can definitely block, can definitely do a number of different things. And as we talked about with tight ends in the past, Brock Bowers is obviously number one. I don't think there's anything that could happen between now and the draft, barring really bad injury, but even then, teams might still take him before some of these other tight ends. After him, I think Ja'Tavion Sanders is probably tight end too. He had a solid workout and kind of did everything he had to do throughout the combine this weekend, but after that, entirely up for grabs, and I think Theo Johnson might have locked himself into the tight end 3 for this weekend, because, man, was it a good workout. Everything he did was just pretty remarkable to watch. And then a couple of back-end guys. Javon Bullard really came in and showed his stuff. I think this was a day that was not super kind to a lot of safeties. We talked about Cam Kitchens earlier not having the best day, and safeties overall just being totally open at that position. There is no one person that is leaps and bounds above everyone like a Kyle Hamilton was a few years ago. So there's an ability here to everyone to jump up into that number one safety spot, and I think Javon Bullard did a lot of really, really good things. The ball drills, he was just as smooth as butter, made every move that they needed him to in perfect stride. He did everything just very smoothly, was very good in ball drills, and scored very well on a number of different areas where maybe some people thought he wouldn't be quite as good, but I think he definitely left as the number one safety for a number of teams. I think a number of teams were looking for a guy to really show up this weekend, and among the safeties, Javon Bullard might have had the best day. So very interested to see what happens with him and the other safeties in this draft, because it's a very interesting group. And then another back-end guy, Mike Sandristril, incredible in every single thing he did. He was top 10 in pretty much every measurement. He has elite game tape, about as good of game tape you're going to find from the nickel position in the country from a year ago. A lot more teams are playing with those 5 DB sets, so he can be on the field pretty much immediately. He will be a great nickel. He plays with a chip on his shoulder, and he kind of personifies what that Michigan attitude has been over the last couple of years with Jim Harbaugh. He's the guy that shows exactly the way they play, the toughness they play with, and very excited to see what he can do, because whatever team gets him is going to love him, because the dude comes in, works his ass off, and plays really, really good football in the time being. So very excited to see what he can do. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast. There has been a ton of things happening around the sport, and I'm doing my best to keep up with everything. We'll probably follow up with a couple more combine takeaways tomorrow, but for now, that'll do it. We are presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a ton to us, so please subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It makes a huge difference for us here at the network. And then we invite you to follow on Facebook, Twitter or X, TikTok, Instagram, all of the different social media pages to follow up with content and updates. We have tons of people covering every sport you can think of and doing it incredibly well. So if you ever need any updates, definitely subscribe to the YouTube channels and all of the socials. You will get everything you need there. But thank you so much for tuning in, and have a wonderful day.
Let's go. I wake up to